Welcome to Tom's True Crime. Today we take you to Houston, Texas. It all began with a 911 call on January 28, 2018 at 6:16 a.m. It was from 62-year-old Valerie Larratek. I'm at my sister's house and she's not here. I haven't been able to get a hold of her and she usually gets back to me, and I call her every morning and night and the phone has been offline. Okay, and what's your sister's name? Valerie Larratek. Her vehicle's here, and that's how she travels. My note that I left yesterday is still in the door. I'm getting worried now. This is not a good day. Valerie Larratek, 65, had vanished from her home under mysterious circumstances. As the police started their search, they uncovered a series of troubling clues. First, they began by interviewing her brother, Leon, who made the 911 call. Leon said her phone goes directly to voice messaging. I left a note there yesterday. It's still there. Her vehicle is here. I'm really nervous. Do you have a key? No, I don't. She doesn't have that many friends. She's like me, kind of solitary. Okay, but now my mind is going everywhere. Leon revealed that Valerie lived alone, keeping mostly to herself. Years ago, her husband had passed, and not long after, her only son, Jack Hawklina, tragically decided to self-exit. When she stopped answering her calls, it wasn't just a missed call. It was a warning no one understood. However, when there were no clues found, Rosie Thomas, Valerie's longtime friend from the post office, grew concerned. Are you worried about Valerie too? Yeah. I haven't got a hold of her for a couple of days, and it's just not like her. So, have you gone in? Did you have a key? No, I don't have a key. Do you have a key? No. No? Okay. For Valerie to vanish without a word, it was clearly a sign that something was terribly wrong. Police next went straight to her home. Searching around the property, they noticed signs that something was amiss. After knocking on the door with no response, they headed to the backyard to investigate further and check if anything or anyone was out of place. Next, they went to the side of the garage, but the blinds blocked their view. Unable to see anything inside, they moved to the back of the house where they found the door wide open. It felt like a strange, silent invitation that pushed the police to step inside and search. Police started going to go inside. They announced themselves and they were worried that there might be somebody in there. The police then noticed something unusual. Pill bottles and medical paperwork scattered around. Inside, there was no sign of Valerie and nothing seemed disturbed, but one odd detail stood out. Valerie's house keys were left hanging from the front doorknob. The keys are on the doorknob. A lot of weird stuff there. Just seems abnormal. An open door, a missing woman, and one chilling clue. The scene held a mystery that hinted at the darkness within. Soon, they moved to check another property Valerie owned, a neighboring house she had been renting to her daughter-in-law, Rebecca. Rosie, Valerie's friend, informed the police that they had recently moved out. Police went to check to see what's going on. They found someone there. Hi, can you come around a second? Yeah. So, what's going on? I'm moving out. Okay, what's your name? Rebecca. This was 43-year-old Rebecca, Valerie's daughter-in-law. Along with her in this house live her 19-year-old son, Gary, and friend, Judy Rittberg. When the officers arrived at Rebecca's home, they found her in the midst of moving out. You're here getting your stuff? Yeah. Rebecca said that on Friday, Valerie told her to come on Saturday morning and get the key. Rebecca told police she had planned to pick up the keys from Valerie on Saturday morning, move the rest of the items, and complete the move on Sunday. Rebecca also offered to show them text messages that might help. What detectives didn't realize was that this encounter would be the thread that could untangle a far darker web. For now, though, everything seemed routine. They pressed on trying to gather information about who last spoke to or saw Valerie, but the search revealed no leads on her whereabouts. Police looked at some text messages between Valerie and Rebecca. A message from Rebecca said, "I'm going to come by in about an hour for the keys." Lisa said when she came to see Valerie, she wasn't answering her, but she wasn't alarmed because Valerie doesn't always answer her. The last text message Rebecca got from Valerie was at 10:35 on the 26th. That was Friday. According to Rebecca, Valerie was home that day. Rebecca said they were hanging out. Police asked Rebecca, "Do you know where she would be right now?" Rebecca said, "I don't." Police explained to Rebecca that Valerie has been reported as a missing person, so they want to do a walkthrough on the rental house. Rebecca said, "That's fine. I have no problem." Rebecca said she didn't come yesterday and I expected her to come by, but I didn't think anything of it. Sometimes she gets mad and won't even talk to me, but she has been pretty cordial with me. Despite finding nothing in the house, police walked away with a timeline from Rebecca, one that could be the key to unraveling the mystery. As time slipped away, their concern deepened, haunted by the question of whether they would find her safe in time. Valerie's brother, her best friend, and her daughter-in-law, three people who were always in close contact with her, had no idea where she was. She had simply vanished without a trace. The more time passes that this person is gone, it can also mean that more time passes that they could be injured, harmed, or pass away. Then, on the night of January 26, 2018, a middle-aged woman drove home from work in Bay Ridge, Texas. But this wasn't just another late-night commute. This drive would change her life forever. On her way, she spotted something odd lying on the road, a smoking pile with bits of black smoke and faint orange embers, suggesting it had recently been on fire. The road was dark, so she kept driving, but the image of that burning pile stayed with her. By the next morning, she returned to see it in daylight, along with her husband. As the couple stepped out of the car for a closer look, what they saw shook them to the core. The husband immediately called the police and told them about the horrifying discovery, and they rushed to the scene without delay. There, lying on a burned mattress, was the body, charred, twisted, and barely human anymore. Metal restraints had bound the corpse, twisting around the wrists and ankles. The right foot was missing. There was no mistaking it. Someone had meant for this body to be found, almost as if daring the world to notice, and that was just the beginning. That evening, police put out that they had discovered these remains and hoping to get tips from the public as far as missing persons. Police probably received 50 phone calls, but the call from Rosie was very specific. Rosie was very concerned that her friend, who had been reported missing, was the deceased person. It would fit the timeline and gave police hope that this was actually the person. After autopsy, police contacted the office of the medical investigator and provided them with the dentist of Valerie Larratek. They were able to confirm that the body on the mattress was Valerie Larratek. The discovery of Valerie's body sent shockwaves through the community, especially her brother. Police gave her brother the sad news. Valerie was no longer missing, but had been taken from him in a most unimaginable way. But detectives were now determined to find who the killer of this gruesome crime could be. Valerie's was a solitary person. She liked to stay home. She had just a few friends. She rarely left the house. Leon couldn't think of why she would be out in Bay Ridge. Valerie was going through the process of evicting Rebecca, getting things started with moving. According to those close to Valerie, Rebecca lies all the time. Rebecca would promise to pay the rent, but she doesn't. Valerie just got tired of it this time, and she decided to evict her. Valerie's relationship with Rebecca wasn't particularly good. The police had just uncovered that their relationship was strained, and another crucial detail was that Rebecca hadn't been moving out by choice, but had been evicted. This was suspicious, especially since she hadn't mentioned it before. The detectives had their work cut out for them. It wasn't just where Valerie lived that interested them now. It was where she might have died. Valerie's own home was their initial focus, but a careful examination turned up no signs of a struggle or blood. It was clear that the murder hadn't happened there. With this information, they turned their attention to another property Valerie owned, the house she had rented out to her daughter-in-law, Rebecca Hawklina, who they just learned was evicted from the house. Detectives shifted their focus to Rebecca's son, Gary, who had moved to a hotel with his girlfriend, Amber, after the eviction. In his initial statement, Gary claimed that the last time he saw his grandmother outside the house was when his mother and Judy moved their belongings. He stated that at that time, nothing seemed to be amiss that would raise suspicions or be cause for any concern. Police asked Gary, "When's the last time you talked to your grandma?" "I would say 3 or 4 days ago. My grandmother was telling my mother that we were getting kicked out, so then I was helping her move out." "How did that make your mom feel?" "Oh, she was pretty upset." "Yeah, she was really upset." "Where's Grandma?" "She was not there when we first got there. She had shown up later. We were moving stuff out, and then she had shown up." Gary was very nonchalant about things. He said he didn't know what was going on with his grandma. He was yawning. He was just waking up. He doesn't even seem to care. Gary was only 19 years old, so detectives overlooked his ignorance about the situation. But now they were ready to reveal his grandmother's death and observe his reaction. "So, your grandma. We found her, but she's dead. Where at?" "Well, we believe that it's suspicious." "Okay, we think that someone killed her. And I'm really sorry." His reaction was out of the ordinary, almost as if he were putting on an act. He denied noticing anything strange or suspicious and maintained that everyone was alive and well when he last saw them. Armed with a search warrant, the officers combed through Rebecca's home. Police got to the house and found Rebecca there. "So this is the situation, okay? We actually have to secure the house." Rebecca said, "Yeah, I'm just trying to get all my stuff out." "Okay." Police said, "Unfortunately, I can't let you go back inside." Rebecca kept saying that she needed to get her things. But police did not let her in the house again. At first, detectives didn't find anything, but then they spotted a drop of blood on the wall in the entryway hallway. This discovery hinted that something more sinister might have occurred. While the search was underway, Rebecca learned that Valerie's body had been found. Strangely, when officers first spoke to Rebecca after Valerie's disappearance, she never mentioned this eviction. She only said she was moving out, a fact that struck detectives as suspicious. To confirm the detectives' suspicions, Rosie, Valerie's friend, provided another perspective. Valerie was frustrated with Rebecca after years of support. Following Jack's death, Valerie wanted Rebecca to pay rent, but Rebecca resisted. So Valerie wanted to sell the house and move on from the emotional and financial toll. When questioned, Rebecca claimed the eviction process was cordial, stating she and Judy wanted to leave peacefully. However, Valerie's actions showed distrust and animosity. Valerie had changed the locks on the door and only allowed Rebecca in when she was present. After searching Rebecca's rented place, police saw her friend Judy come to the driveway. Police asked Judy, "Did you meet Valerie at all last week?" "Yeah." "Well, she was here when we were moving stuff." "Tell me what she was doing here." "She was in her vehicle. She was in and out of the house. She was nagging everybody, telling us how to move out." "Oh, really?" "And then she came at me and she said that this is your fault. You know why they're getting evicted, right? Because of you. Tell me what you think's happening. I just don't like the way I'm being approached and questioned." While investigating everyone close to Valerie, they got the autopsy reports. What the autopsy revealed wasn't just death. It was a horror written in violence and fire. She had been beaten and stabbed to death. But the violence didn't end there. After killing her, the murderer or an accomplice transported her body to Bay Ridge, laid a mattress on the road, and placed Valerie's body on top before setting it aflame. The killer didn't stop at stabbing and beating Valerie. She was drenched in gasoline and then set her body ablaze before disappearing into the night. When the medical examiner inspected the remains, they confirmed there were no signs of sexual assault, but ligature marks around Valerie's wrists and ankles revealed she had likely been bound, either before or during her murder. However, Rebecca's interview didn't end there. There were more details that would raise red flags. Rebecca continued to say, "I want to get my things out first." But police said nobody can go back in until the search warrant's completed. "You gotta understand." Rebecca said, "But I want my clothes, and I want to go to my hotel, and I want to sleep. My back hurts. I'm tired of moving." "I understand. I just want my clothes, that's all." Because she said she goes to work on Monday. That she wanted to take the weekend to move. Valerie said come over in the morning and get the keys. So she's telling you to come over in the morning and get the keys from her. Rebecca said she went on Saturday morning to pick up the keys. Around 10 o'clock. And I just knock on the door, get the keys. She says, "Give them to me on Sunday," and that's all we said. That was it. Not even another word. Rebecca's timeline of events didn't match the facts, so detectives pressed her on her shifting story. What raised further suspicion was Rebecca's claim that she last saw Valerie on Saturday morning. The problem was that Valerie wasn't alive at that time, making Rebecca's story increasingly strange. As a result, police took both Rebecca and Judy into custody, handcuffing them for formal interviews. After this, detectives also brought Gary into custody and interviewed him. However, this time, Gary would reveal something that would change the entire investigation. Gary's words seemed to offer a twisted justification for the unimaginable. He told detectives he had complied with Rebecca's wishes carrying out her request with a sense of reluctant duty. This was the moment investigators had been waiting for. The tense pause before they finally expected a confession about how Valerie was mercilessly murdered. Gary's confession may have held a tiny bit of truth, or it could be hiding something far darker. Yet this statement only deepened the detective's suspicions. Ultimately, further evidence revealed the grim truth. Valerie's murder was a coordinated act involving not by strangers, but by those closest to her. Gary's confession, alongside corroborating evidence, confirmed that Rebecca, Gary, and Judy all had played a part in Valerie's murder. But Rebecca had another version of the story to tell. Rebecca said, "I stayed in my room, and at that point, I did hear Valerie yell, and I went out there. Valerie's on the ground and Judy's got her knee on her back. Judy was hitting Valerie's face, and so I'm kind of panicking, but I'm mad. And I did hit Valerie. I tied up her hands and legs, and I helped her put this bag over her head. Do you remember what you did it with? What you tied her up with? Yeah, it was like phone cords and stuff like that. Then there's the other one that Judy gets, put it around her neck. And I hear it snap, but I don't know if it's the cord. So you heard something snap, whether it was the cord or Valerie snapping? You're not sure." Rebecca also revealed that she had left Valerie alone with Judy, and when she returned, she found Judy wiping a bloody knife. Rebecca's accounts seemed to be different. In her confession, Gary was not involved. "We ended up going into Bay Ridge. Then we unloaded the mattress and I poured gasoline and I set it on fire." "What did you assume had happened when you left?" "Well, I would assume that she stabbed her or something." "Okay, so you don't see Gary at that point?" No, not at all in the house." "Okay." It didn't quite ring true to police because, first of all, she's putting Gary out of the story. Judy really has no reason to stab Valerie. Just out of the blue, they beat her up. Valerie's unconscious. Why would Judy just stab Valerie? But police quickly found holes in Rebecca's story. With the faults in her story laid bare, they moved on to interviewing the third person who lived in the rented house, Judy. Judy said, "So when Gary got there, we all were in Rebecca's room getting high. That's pretty much when Rebecca, she had brought it up before about killing Valerie. I still didn't think we were going to do it. I thought she was joking. She just told me when she nods because she would pretend that she was the Dawn, like the Godfather. She just told me, when I nod, get her." And Valerie was coming in. Gary said to Valerie, "Can you just let us stay? Look at my mom packing." Valerie said no. Rebecca looked at me and then at Gary and nodded. And I looked at Gary and he started walking behind Valerie. And I got Valerie from behind and took her down. Both Judy and Rebecca agreed that Judy was the first to lay hands on Valerie. But while their versions of events matched in some ways, Rebecca never mentioned that the incident was planned, making it seem like it happened in the heat of the moment. Additionally, Rebecca failed to mention that Gary had been present during the incident. Gary was on the side of me and Rebecca. She ran into the room and came out with a short bat, and Gary got on top of her. I think I yelled at Rebecca to get something to cover her mouth. I had gotten another cord and put it around her neck to strangle her, and Gary pulled it with me and it broke. And then Gary grabbed just Valerie's neck and cut her throat. Judy's version of events offered an even more gruesome insight. She claimed that Gary had been present during the killing and that he even assisted in the assault. She stated that Gary helped hold Valerie down, beat her with a baseball bat, and ultimately slash her throat. Judy is adamant that Gary's actually the one who stabbed Valerie in the neck and in the throat. Police believe that Judy's being more truthful. Police think that Rebecca, being a mom, is trying to protect her son from any involvement in this case. As investigators piece together the events, they realize this brutal murder was a calculated crime, carried out by a family united by violence in a desperate attempt to cover their tracks. Police believe that all three of these individuals did beat Valerie, did kick Valerie, punched Valerie, choked Valerie. They hit her with a bat. They wrapped plastic around her head. They attempted to choke her to death and eventually stab her to death. They load Valerie's dead body into a vehicle and drive Valerie's body into the Bay Ridge area. Gary's girlfriend Amber also revealed a chilling account in which Rebecca and Judy forced her to help dispose of Valerie's body at knife and gunpoint. Nikki described seeing Valerie face down and bloody before Rebecca wrapped her in a sheet and loaded her onto Judy's pickup. Under threat, she drove to a remote location where they got Valerie outside the car to set the final plan in motion. She watched Rebecca pour gasoline on Valerie and set her on fire. And as they drove away, they could see her body burning in the rear-view mirror. To corroborate this information, surveillance footage placed Judy's truck near the dump site, and a search revealed DNA including Valerie's blood, her purse, medications, and keys in the truck bed. In May 2018, police arrested Rebecca for Valerie's murder and later charged Judy as well. Rebecca Hawklina and her son Gary confessed to their roles in the death of Valerie Larratek. They pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The court revealed the terrible details of the crime where the Hawklinas, facing eviction for not paying rent, let their anger turn into a violent attack. Along with Judy, they brutally took Valerie's life and left her body on a remote hillside. Judy, who had already admitted her part in the crime, was ready to testify against Rebecca and Gary. Her attorney told the court how the crime took place according to Judy. As prosecutors prepared for a trial, Valerie's family chose to accept a plea deal to avoid the pain of a courtroom battle. After reflecting on this decision, the judge finally delivered the verdict on October 3, 2019. The judge sentenced Gary to 26 years, Rebecca to 30 years in prison, and Judy, who cooperated with the prosecution, to 12 years. The case ended, but the family continued to grieve for Valerie and the senseless violence that ended her life. Thank you for being with us. If you'd like to support our channel and help us to continue to make content, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps us so much and we really appreciate it. If you are still with us at this point, please write pizza and soda in the comments below. Welcome to Tom's True Crime. Today we take you to New Orleans, Louisiana. On the night New Orleans celebrates its dark side, one man's revelry turns into a nightmare. A person wearing a costume and a hooded robe coming out of the rose bushes. You would have thought it came out of a scary movie, but this was real life. Did a passion for fringe interests lead to murder? Rumors about alien cultures, ancient cultures, and ancient civilizations. This case involves a business where spirit animal furs are sold to adults, secretive venues, a gothic S&M, sadism, and masochism club. Police eventually discover the truth is even more frightening than alien ancestors or S&M. All murders are bad, some are more heinous than others, and this was about as bad as it gets. Whatever you think where the bottom of society is, this case will make you realize that it is lower. It's a mystery that proves on Halloween, some monsters are real. In New Orleans, Halloween is crazy. Most people are dressed in Halloween costumes. People are all in masks. French Quarter is really the epicenter of partying on Halloween in Louisiana. Bourbon Street's been a Halloween party night for decades. It's a fun time, but it's also a scary time. You have your ghosts, you have your goblins, you have your devils. No one's thinking that the ghost or goblin, the person dressed up in those costumes, would ever think to actually commit a crime until it happens. November 1st, 2019. It's the morning after another wild Halloween in New Orleans. For one local, the party is coming to an end. All morning, she's been trying to reach her friend and co-worker, 42-year-old David Jabin. She had called him multiple times that morning, but he wasn't picking up. Just after 11 a.m., his worried co-worker decides to head to David's residence in the French Quarter area. When officers rush to the scene, they confirm her fears. The injury to David's head was very clearly a high-powered firearm. It was clear that where the injury was to the back of the head is not something that he could have survived. The condition of the body suggests that he's been dead for some time. It did not occur recently, probably more than hours since he was assaulted. This is a brutal crime, even for seasoned New Orleans cops. But the fact that it seems to have taken place on Halloween is even more concerning. Halloween could provide a great setting for the shooter, in this case, to disguise his appearance, and to be able to get close to David's doorstep, David's home, without much suspicion. Everyone spoke very well of David. What happened? Who would go after David? David Jabin was born in New Orleans in 1977, one of two sons raised by John and Beth Jabin. He was the younger of the two brothers, and there were just the two of them. David was somewhat the darling of the family. After high school, he had a number of different jobs. He was an entrepreneur, he was doing some unique sales, he was selling costume jewelry, and he was selling clothing and high-end fashion. He was also doing some financial planning and insurance sales. He was very successful with that. As David's business ventures grew, so did his circle of friends and business partners. Those who knew David said he was a good listener. He was very bright, very accomplished, and he worked hard. He was very accepting of everybody. He took people as they are. David led an alternate lifestyle in a certain way. He had the jewelry business, but he was also the executive in a very popular fashion business. David had this business where he sold spirit animal furs to adults. In addition to outfitting the alternative community, he also catered to the crowd at clubs and EDM, electronic dance music venues. There was a lingerie business where they were selling lingerie, too. There were bras everywhere. One of his favorite venues to sell at was an old bar up in Bourbon Street, a gothic S&M club. And he was a regular selling his wares, selling his jewelry, selling his lingerie. That was fun for him because he was a people person. As David entered his 30s, his business ventures were going strong, and he was ready to settle down. David met a girl named Danielle through her mother. She introduced him to Danielle, her daughter, and eventually they got married. In 2010, David and Danielle had a daughter together, and as she grew up, David was a dedicated parent. David became a father, and he loved it. He doted over his daughter, and he was spending every minute he could with her. He wanted to teach her about all the stuff he knew about history. He was excited to pass on his knowledge when she was ready. The bond between David and his daughter was strong. But in 2015, after 6 years of marriage, he realized he and his wife Danielle were on different paths. Danielle got very involved with Scientology and was pushing David to also get involved with Scientology. David did not believe that, and that caused a big rift between them. And eventually they ended up separating. The divorce gave David a chance to start over. He moved into a nearby house he inherited from his grandmother and stayed involved as his daughter grew up. They were amicable in the divorce as far as their daughter was concerned. They split custody. David had her very often, and they were always doing something together. They loved amusement parks. They loved Star Wars, space, and science. When he wasn't spending time with his daughter, David threw himself into his work and his friendships. David's house was always open. He was always having people over and coming and going. He was doing his business out of the house. He was selling his wares and preparing and doing photo shoots. Everybody always loved to hang out there. But on November 1st, 2019, David's coworker has discovered him murdered on his doorstep. Officers checked the surrounding area to make sure there are no other victims. When the police looked inside David's house, they did not find anything to suggest any kind of crime or anything happened inside the house. After clearing the scene, homicide detectives respond. When they arrived, they met with the police officers that were at the scene who told them what they knew at that point. The victim was wearing a costume at the time, a Halloween-type costume. It was a 1920s gangster style of costume. Detectives were unsure if he had just got home from partying. They didn't know if it was a random act of violence. David had a shotgun blast to the back of the head, and he had a graze wound to his face. It was clear that there were 2 shots fired. To an experienced investigator, it would look as if it was fired at close range because there were other indicators such as soot and stippling. There were no casings left behind. There were no items taken from David. If it's not a robbery, then clearly the only crime that was sought to be committed that day was to murder David. Why would they want to murder him in this way, at this location, on this date? Everything happened really quickly. They were just trying to figure out what happened. There were so many unanswered questions. Who would do such a thing? Before long, investigators would discover this isn't the first time David's been attacked. He was the victim of a break-in, and they zero in on a real-life monster. It was as if the killer feared nothing and nobody. The morning after Halloween 2019, New Orleans detectives are piecing together what happened before 42-year-old David Jabin was gunned down in front of his home. Responding to a crime scene like that, detectives are trying to think of any knowledge of the neighborhood that had a previous problem. Is there a crime problem going on there? Is there a gang problem? Is there a violent crime, assault problem in that area? If the crime occurred the night before, when the streets were filled with revelers, detectives hoped to find someone who witnessed the horror. David did have a nice network of neighbors that he knew. But where David was positioned in the house, unless you came up to his door, you would not see him. But some neighbors told detectives that they did hear something that could have been gunshots. But keep in mind, it's Halloween. This could have been anything. So no one thought enough to call police. investigators do spot an important detail. There were surveillance cameras set up, and one was pointed directly in the area of where David Jabin was shot and later located. When detectives saw the cameras, they were hopeful that they were going to get footage of the actual crime. But they don't know if they're being recorded or if they are dummy cameras. They did not know what the value is going to be. Something caused David enough fear to have him go install cameras to different parts of the house. As police continue their investigation, they learn they have a difficult notification to make to one of their own. At the time, David's brother, Kevin, was working for the New Orleans County Sheriff's Department as a deputy sheriff. They were doing some training for the Homicide Bureau. The training was wrapping up when Kevin's sergeant got a phone call. And he says, "I have some bad news. Your brother was killed." Disbelief went through Kevin's mind because he hadn't put it together yet. He definitely disassociated and went into that unemotional cop mode where you just get the facts, take emotion out of it, get the job done. Kevin met with the New Orleans Police Department detectives, and they started filling him in on the story on what happened. They take Kevin into the house and they show him the scene and the patio. And then it starts to sink in because the house was very quiet in a weird way. And the house felt very empty. That's where it happened. That's where he was killed. To find out if their victim had enemies, detectives talked to David's coworker and his brother. They talked to the 911 caller. They called in what they had discovered to brief them the best they could. She was very upset about her friend and business partner, but in control and able to share the information that she had about what may have happened to David. While some of David's entrepreneurial endeavors were a little unconventional, his personal beliefs were even more unique. David was heavily interested in the exploration of humanity and the origins of humanity. David was a devotee of Zecharia Sitchin. Zecharia Sitchin was born in 1920 and died in 2010. He was an Azerbaijani-born American author, best known for his controversial theories about ancient history, which he presented in a series of books, most notably the Earth Chronicles series. Sitchin's work, especially his ideas about ancient civilizations and extraterrestrial influences, has been widely criticized by scholars and mainstream historians, but has garnered a significant following among those interested in alternative history and ancient astronaut theories. He argued that humans were descended from extraterrestrials. Zecharia was David Jabin's mentor and his teacher in ancient cultures, ancient civilizations. David also became his webmaster and started managing his knowledge portfolio. David would travel to Mexico, Yucatan Peninsula, study the Mayans and even more ancient cultures. David traveled to Egypt several times. Kevin thought it was a little far-fetched, but when David would bring up different bits and pieces of evidence, he was very passionate about it and very emotional about it and very convincing. It was fun for him. Kevin, David's brother, found it interesting when debating the theories. It was weird, but David was really into it. He was doing a lot of research with professors. They were learning about Sumerians. The Sumerians were an ancient civilization that lived in Sumer, which was located in the southern part of Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. The Sumerians are considered one of the world's first advanced civilizations, and they played a foundational role in the development of human culture, technology, and society. The learning made David Jabin happy. A thorough police investigation into David Jabin's murder involved looking at those things, and then look at everything they can about David. They looked at who the victim was, and they investigated his background. There was nothing there to suggest that he had any enemies. But Kevin tells investigators, David did have enemies, just not from his businesses or his beliefs. Kevin thinks the shooting is related to a scary experience David had the year before. David had a home invasion robbery, but he was very hush-hush about it. In the fall of 2018, David was at his home and he got a knock on his door and there were two men outside, one African-American male and another white male. They said they had a document from court with which they needed to serve David. So he said the guys got some papers to serve, whatever, and he let them in. Once the two suspects entered David's home, the African-American suspect produced a firearm, pointed it at David and told him, "Where's all the money? Give us all the money." And when David said, "There is no money," the African-American suspect hit David on the head with a firearm. David was pistol whipped, tied up, and then the house was ransacked and robbed. The assailants fled with a computer, 2 phones, a camera, and $900 in cash. Once David realized that the suspects had left, he was able to loosen himself from the electrical cord, and he was able to call 911. Responding officers realized David's attackers left a crucial piece of evidence behind. The police arrived, they confiscated the supposed court document, and they took that into evidence. The lab personnel were able to get fingerprints from that paperwork. They were lifted by technicians from the crime lab. Those fingerprint cards were entered into the fingerprint database, and police got a hit. Detectives investigating the Halloween murder of David Jabin learned about a previous home invasion and analyzed the evidence to determine if it could be related to his murder a year later. Two suspects in that case. One of them left fingerprints behind on some documents. The list came back to a Tony Samberger. He was a crook, a bad guy with a rap sheet. Tony Samberger is familiar with the criminal justice system. He was on felony probation at the time that the home invasion robbery had occurred. He's had prior convictions. He's had cases of evading police. He's had drug possession convictions. After his fingerprints matched those false documents, they showed David Jabin a lineup of men, and David was easily able to identify Tony Samberger. The robbers had targeted David Jabin, thinking that the costume jewelry was real. Someone had targeted him from his online store. But law enforcement was unable to identify the other suspect who did the home invasion. Samberger was arrested and charged with robbery on August 30th, 2019, almost exactly 1 year after the home invasion. David agreed to testify in court. Kevin was 100% against him testifying. Kevin said to David, "This is a revolving door. Don't get involved. Forget it. They know where you live. What are you doing?" David was very paranoid about being robbed again. On the Sunday before he died, David was talking to Kevin about testifying in open court, and would the defendant know who was testifying against him, where he lived, and if he was entitled to witness protection and all of that. The pretrial hearing was scheduled to take place after Halloween on December 2nd. But David was murdered before it could happen. Kevin tells investigators the home invasion experience convinced his brother to up his home security. He was also afraid that they would come back again and do another home invasion, because now they know what he's got. That afternoon, investigators finally get access to the password-protected home security system. So when they found the hard drive for the security system and got into it, the footage they pulled up occurred just after about 2 in the morning. As investigators watch, a nightmarish scenario unfolds. The video the police witnessed looked like something out of a scary movie, but this was real life. David was out at the Halloween carnival with a couple of his friends. They had come back to the house, said their goodbyes. So David had walked his girlfriends out to their car, got them safely into their car, said goodnight, and he was coming back into his house. And once he gets to the front door, at that same time, the shooter comes up. The person wearing a costume and a hooded robe coming out of the rose bushes. They fired twice, and you could see the blast, but you just couldn't see the impact. But what police could see was David feeling that impact and falling to the ground. All murders are bad. Some are more heinous than others, and this was about as bad as it gets. Knowing that David Jabin was supposed to be the key witness in the pretrial hearing for Tony Samberger, police now have a suspect, because that would have been the motive to get rid of him. However, there are two major problems with the theory. For one, Tony Samberger does not seem to fit the description of the very large man who killed David, and he's in no position to shoot anyone. Tony Samberger was in custody at the time that the murder was committed, so he was not the shooter. Even if Tony wasn't the shooter, his behavior proves that he is still dangerous, even behind bars. When it came to Tony Samberger, it was as if he feared nothing and nobody. He would threaten police officers, and while he was in jail, he stabbed someone with a shank. At the county jail, inmates can use a payphone, and all those phone calls are recorded. In this particular investigation, police worked with the sheriff's department to pull all phone calls related to Tony Samberger. Detectives sift through hundreds of recorded calls and find one that's very suspicious. He was heard saying, "Somebody else has got to fight this case for me on the street. They got to make this all just disappear." They were communicating in code, trying to leave out keywords and phrases. The motive behind this crime could be to prevent a witness, the victim in this case, David Jabin, from appearing in court and testifying against Tony Samberger. That's the only way he is going to be cleared. Detectives use visitor logs to determine the man on the recording is George Frantelli, Tony's friend and the man dating Tony's niece Maria. On another suspicious recording, 5 days before David's murder, Samberger seems to coach his girlfriend, Emily Montpike, on what to say if police show up asking questions. "You have the right to remain silent." The right to remain silent. Huh? From the cradle to the grave. Simple. Got it. That's under any and all circumstances. And on the morning after Halloween, there is a final call that is chillingly celebratory. Hey baby, what's going on? Everything good? Everything is wonderful. I love you. I love you too. Hey, what's right? That's enough. That's enough. Okay? That's enough. Everything is great. You know that? Everything is great. Okay? As police investigate, a mastermind reveals the true source of his power. Recorded prison phone calls have given detectives reason to believe inmate Tony Samberger orchestrated the Halloween murder of David Jabin from behind bars. Those same calls also reveal an upcoming visit from his possible co-conspirators. The three individuals that came to visit Tony Samberger were identified as Emily Montpike, Maria Samberger, and George Frantelli. Emily Montpike was Tony Samberger's girlfriend. Maria Samberger was Tony Samberger's niece that Tony Samberger let live with him. George Frantelli was the boyfriend of Maria Samberger. When they arrive, 3 days after the killing, police are listening in. From the image on David's security cameras, investigators know his killer was a giant of a man. And Tony Samberger's first visitor fits the description. George Frantelli, a 300-pound man nicknamed the Tank. They start talking, and the conversation begins by Tony Samberger asking him, "You good? You all right?" "Yeah." Throughout the conversation, they are both laughing. It was a very cold and callous response to what had occurred. Tony's conversation with his niece, Maria Samberger, is equally damning. Tony said to Maria, "Good. But you up close and personal? You confirm it? Really? You did?" Tony Samberger kind of adopted Maria as his daughter and would refer to her as such. He said to Maria, "Well, now that this is done, we'll go to Vegas for your birthday." Tony's final visitor is his girlfriend, Emily Montpike. "I knew what I had in my head. Everybody that I had, sweetie, I know what I'm doing with her." "I know." But detectives are just as interested in the moments where no one is talking. As they're speaking, there are different pauses. You can hear silences throughout. And it's at that time that police suspect Tony was putting up written notes on the glass partition that could be read. And that way, he didn't have to say them. Very conscientious sheriff's deputies monitored visitation. They saw where they ripped up and threw away some documents in the trash when his visitors left. The deputies recovered those documents. One note written by Emily informed Tony that David's murder was on the news. Another is written by Tony Samberger himself. If anyone asks you questions, say that you're not talking without a lawyer and that you were on that day playing Left 4 Dead 2, which is a video game all night. The day after their visit, investigators arrest all three of Tony's accomplices. A search of the home they shared with Tony reveals a visitor's pass dated 2 weeks before Halloween and a notebook containing the instructions Tony dictated over the phone. It included writing related to double-aught buck, which is the size of the buckshot that was ultimately used to murder David Jabin. Double-aught buck refers to a specific size of buckshot used in shotgun shells. Buckshot is a type of shotgun ammunition that contains multiple small pellets, typically used for hunting larger animals or for defensive purposes. In the case of double-O buck, the double-aught refers to the size of the pellets. Each double-O buck pellet is approximately 0.33 inches in diameter. The double-O designation comes from the traditional system of naming buckshot sizes, where O represents a certain size, and double O is a larger variant. A typical double-O buckshot load contains about 9 pellets in a 2 3/4-inch shell, although the number can vary depending on the specific load. These pellets are large enough to deliver significant stopping power, which is why double-O buckshot is popular for home defense and law enforcement use, as well as hunting large game like deer. It doesn't take long for police to get Tony Samberger henchmen to do the one thing he warned them not to do: talk. Tactically, police interviewed Tony's niece, Maria, first, always trying to interview the weakest link first to obtain the most information they can. She essentially broke and laid out all the circumstances of what occurred with David Jabin being killed. Maria Samberger laid out herself as being a lookout while they were at the location. She had described that George Frantelli was the person who shot David and killed him. Maria essentially spelled everything out to police of what happened to David. They mentioned the fact that Halloween is a busy night. They would fit in if they were wearing masks and disguises, and that was a perfect night to have a mask or a disguise. Maria told police that Tony had them case the house. She told them how they got the shotgun and how they threw it in the ocean after the crime. George Frantelli later confirms the story when he confides in a jailhouse informant. First, he told him that he was arrested because he had conducted a hit for the homie Tony. George Fratelli went on to say that the shooting happened on Halloween, the general location of where the shooting was, the fact that they ditched the gun at the beach, and that the reason for the murder was because the witness, David Jabin, was going to testify against Tony Samberger. After the arrest, Maria and Emily Montpike were put in a cell together, and that cell was recorded so they could capture their conversation. In that recording, you can hear Maria repeatedly getting emotional. Listening to Samberger conspirators, it's clear that Tony Samberger had a hold over them. It seems Maria was manipulated into something that is not her character. Tony Samberger said, "I was thinking, my niece is not in jail for nothing serious because she's not capable of really doing too much." Tony Samberger is an evil human being that took advantage of individuals that he knew he could manipulate. The case will end up in a chilling courtroom reenactment. In Monster Maker, Tony Samberger nickname is betrayed by one of his own creations. Maria was a respectful person, and her uncle manipulated her. Less than a week after David Jabin was killed at his New Orleans home, prosecutors charged Tony Samberger and 3 others for conspiring in a fiendish Halloween murder plot. David's final moments were clearly moments of fear. And to have it happen in front of his own house was more terrifying because that's your safe place. And if you're not safe in your safe place, then where are you safe? It takes nearly 2 years for the case to make it to court. The alleged gunman, George Fratelli, and Samberger girlfriend, Emily Montpike, plead not guilty and are the first to stand trial in September 2022. George Fratelli would be the second most culpable person because he's the shooter. Right before you squeeze that trigger, you have to really think about what you're doing and if it's the right decision. You need to be determined to do it, and he was. Emily Montpike, Tony's girlfriend, is a very close third because none of this would have happened without her. She organized everything. She planned. She helped carry out exactly what Tony Samberger told her to do. In October 2022, the jury finds them both guilty. Emily Montpike was convicted of murder, and that sentence gave Emily Montpike life without the possibility of parole. The same was found true for George Fratelli. Almost a year later, in August 2023, Tony Samberger trial begins. As the alleged mastermind, he faces the death penalty. Tony Samberger is the worst, and the worst of the worst. You think you've seen where the bottom of society is, and then you see the Tony Sambergers of the world, and you realize that whatever that bar was lower. He never showed any kind of remorse. The prosecution's star witness is the last of the conspirators, 24-year-old Maria Samberger. Maria said that she wanted to help Tony because she thought that doing that was the right thing. Maria was offered a leniency agreement where she essentially pled to a second-degree murder, so that sentence gave Maria life with the possibility of parole. A family member of Maria's said, after Maria's mother passed away, she moved to New Orleans. It was pretty sad when she moved away because that side of the family was almost gone. She was a respectful person, and her uncle manipulated her to doing a crime. He was the one to put up such young people to such things. To emphasize the terrifying nature of the crime, prosecutors show jurors footage from David Jabin's security camera. This case traumatized police to such an extent that one of them said, "To this day, when I come to my door, I still think about it, because he was trying to open his door, and I think how frightened he must have been. It was a bad nightmare." The evidence showed that Tony Samberger was involved in every detail related to this murder, including the date it was to happen, the type of costumes to buy, what type of firearms to use, what type of ammunition to use, what to say to the police after the murder was committed. Tony Samberger was the architect of every part of it. On September 8, 2023, the jury finds Tony Samberger guilty. Tony Samberger was found by a jury that his appropriate sentence was the death penalty. While David's killers were brought to justice, his loved ones still struggle with the loss. They think about it all the time, and his daughter and his ex-wife. It's sad that he's missing his daughter growing up and going to high school and graduating and college and the whole thing. They felt like something was stolen from them. They still do. What was once a fun holiday, Halloween will never be the same for David Jabin's community. Every Halloween, they look around and they see kids in costumes and parents, and they think on this day, back in 2019, this happened to David Jabin. You can't not remember it. They don't really celebrate Halloween anymore. And they don't decorate their houses. It's hard. It takes a lot of fun out of it. Halloween is definitely a reminder of David and fun times that he had with all of his friends, even up to the last night he was alive. He said goodbye, and that was it. Thank you for being with me on this episode of Tom's True Crime. If you are interested in more in-depth investigations into the most perplexing crimes, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. What are your thoughts about this case? Please share them with us in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe.